The apartment building was silent that night, but something sinister was hidden deep in its walls. A bag had dropped down the 22-story garbage chute hours ago, landing with a hollow thud among the trash. No one paid attention. It was just another piece of garbage. But this bag wasn't like the others. When a maintenance worker came to clear the bins, they didn't notice anything unusual at first. It was routine. Drag the bags, load them into the compactor, and move on. Then one bag moved. At first it was so slight they thought they imagined it. But then it twitched again, slower this time, almost like a faint heartbeat. The worker's stomach churned as they ripped the bag open. What they found froze them in place. Inside was a dog, starved, skeletal, barely breathing. Someone had thrown him away like trash. The maintenance worker stood frozen, staring at the frail dog inside the torn bag. For a moment, they couldn't move. It was like time had stopped. The dog was barely alive. His ribs jutted out sharply and his coat was patchy and dull. His body was so weak that he couldn't lift his head or even whimper. He just lay there, gasping for air, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Who could do this? The thought rang through the worker's mind. Someone had starved this animal, stuffed him into a garbage bag, and thrown him away like he was nothing. They had sent him down a 22-story garbage chute, straight toward the compactor. If the timing had been any different, if the worker had come even a few minutes later, this dog wouldn't have stood a chance. Shaking off the shock, the worker acted quickly. They called Newark Animal Control, their voice trembling as they described the situation. "He's barely alive," they said. "Please hurry." Within minutes, Arthur Skinner, an animal control officer, arrived at the scene. As soon as he saw the dog, his heart sank. He had dealt with cruelty cases before, but this was something else. Skinner gently lifted the dog out of the bag. The animal's body was limp in his hands, cold to the touch. His weight was so alarmingly low that it felt like holding an empty frame. Skinner wrapped the dog in a blanket, placed him in his truck, and sped off toward the nearest veterinary clinic. The dog's condition was critical. Every second counted. Skinner didn't know if he would survive the ride, but he wasn't giving up, not on this dog. As they pulled into the clinic's driveway, the team inside was already preparing for an emergency. The odds were against the frail, broken creature in Skinner's arms, but somehow, even as his body seemed ready to give up, the flicker of life in his eyes told a different story. This dog wasn't done fighting yet. When the animal control truck screeched to a halt outside the veterinary clinic, the team was already waiting. Arthur Skinner jumped out, carrying the lifeless dog wrapped in a blanket. The pit bull was barely breathing, and his body hung limply in Skinner's arms. The staff wasted no time. They carefully transferred the dog to an examination table and began their assessment. His condition was worse than anyone could have imagined. The thermometer beeped, but his temperature didn't register. It was too low. The dog was hypothermic, his body too cold to sustain normal functions. His heartbeat was faint, irregular, and barely strong enough to keep him alive. The vet techs glanced at each other nervously, understanding the gravity of the situation without speaking a word. IV lines were inserted into his frail legs, delivering fluids to rehydrate his starved body. Heating pads were placed under and over him, and blankets were wrapped tightly around his fragile frame. Every move the team made was careful and precise. There was no room for error. One vet tech, Gina DeSalvo, stayed by his side the entire time. She gently stroked his head and whispered soothing words, her voice soft and calming. The dog didn't have the strength to move, but his dull eyes flickered open for a moment, meeting hers. It was as if he understood she was trying to help. As the hours passed, the team worked tirelessly. They monitored his vitals, adjusted his fluids, and watched for even the smallest signs of improvement. It was touch and go. No one knew if he would make it through the night. But then, something changed. By the early hours of the morning, his breathing grew steadier. His heartbeat, though still weak, became more regular. His body, wrapped in warmth, began to stabilize. The dog was still on the brink, but he was holding on. "If he makes it through the night," one vet said quietly, "he might just have a chance." The clinic was quiet as the team watched over him, waiting, hoping. Gina stayed by his side, cradling his head in her hands. She whispered to him, "You're not alone anymore. You're safe now." No one expected him to survive the first 24 hours, but Patrick, as they would soon call him, wasn't ready to give up. He had fought to stay alive this long, and now, with the love and care of the veterinary staff, he was ready to fight even harder. The sun rose slowly over the veterinary clinic as the staff began their rounds. Against all odds, the frail pit bull had survived the night. It was nothing short of a miracle. He was still far from stable, but the faint rhythm of his breathing and the slight warmth returning to his body gave everyone hope. They knew he wasn't out of danger yet, but his sheer determination to hold on inspired them to keep fighting for him. It was time to give this dog an identity, something to symbolize his resilience. One of the techs, Gina DeSalvo, suggested the name Patrick. It felt fitting. Patrick, after the saint, known for miracles, was a name that carried hope. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise that his life, once discarded, now mattered. As the hours turned into days, Patrick began to show tiny signs of improvement. His first meal, a few carefully measured bites of soft food, was a victory. He couldn't eat much, but he accepted the food eagerly, as though he finally believed he was safe. The team worked tirelessly to help him recover. He was given a blood transfusion to replenish his depleted body. His fur, dull and patchy when he arrived, began to show a faint sheen as his body absorbed the nutrients he desperately needed. Then, one afternoon, Patrick made a monumental step. He tried to stand. His legs wobbled under his weight, or what little weight he had, but he managed to lift himself off the ground for a few seconds. The room erupted in quiet cheers and tears. Patrick was proving what they already suspected. He was a fighter. The bond between Patrick and the clinic staff grew stronger each day. They didn't just see a dog. They saw a survivor. He greeted them with tired but trusting eyes, wagging his tail ever so slightly as they approached. It was as though he understood they were on his side. For Patrick, every small victory felt like a leap forward. The moments that might seem ordinary for any other dog, like standing, eating, or wagging a tail, were extraordinary for him. Each milestone reminded the team why they refused to give up on him. The name Patrick wasn't just symbolic anymore. It became a rallying cry for everyone who worked tirelessly to bring him back from the brink of death. Patrick wasn't just surviving, he was starting to live again. But his journey was far from over. There were still battles to face, wounds to heal, and trust to rebuild. Yet one thing was certain. Patrick wasn't fighting alone anymore. Patrick's recovery was slow, but every small victory felt monumental to those around him. Day by day, the frail dog who had been discarded like trash began to transform into something extraordinary. The first major milestone came when Patrick began eating full meals. At first, his portions were carefully measured. His system was too fragile to handle much at once. But as he grew stronger, so did his appetite. His thin frame, once skeletal, started to fill out. His coat, dull and patchy when he arrived, began to grow back shiny and healthy. One morning, the clinic staff heard something unexpected. Patrick barked. It wasn't loud and it wasn't strong, but it was there, a hoarse, raspy sound that made everyone stop and smile. It was as if Patrick was finally finding his voice, letting the world know he was still here. The next breakthrough came with movement. Patrick, who could barely lift his head when he first arrived, began taking cautious steps. His legs wobbled beneath him, unsteady and weak, but he didn't let that stop him. With every attempt, he grew a little stronger. Soon, he was walking across the clinic on his own, his tail wagging faintly behind him. Patrick's personality began to shine through. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. He became curious about his surroundings, sniffing at toys and nudging the hands of the people who cared for him. One day, he picked up a tug toy and held it between his teeth. It was a simple action, but for Patrick, it was a moment of triumph. The staff couldn't help but laugh as he playfully tugged at the toy, a spark of joy in his eyes that hadn't been there before. With each passing day, Patrick's progress became more apparent. His weight, which had been dangerously low, began climbing steadily. He gained strength in his legs, and his walks turned into short runs in the clinic's outdoor space. Grass beneath his paws, sunshine on his back. These were experiences Patrick had likely never known before. And now, he embraced them with the curiosity of a puppy. Even the smallest moments felt extraordinary. Patrick loved mealtime, eagerly wagging his tail as his bowl was placed in front of him. He licked the plate clean every time, his excitement infectious to everyone who watched. The staff marveled at his resilience. "Can you believe this is the same dog who came in barely alive?" one vet tech asked. It was a question they asked themselves often. But Patrick wasn't just healing physically. He was healing emotionally, too. Despite everything he'd endured, he showed no fear or anger toward people. Instead, he greeted them with a wagging tail and trusting eyes. He loved their touch, leaning into their hands as they stroked his back. Patrick's journey was far from over, but he was proving one thing every single day. He was a survivor. His small victories weren't just his. They were shared by everyone who believed in him. Patrick was making progress every day, but his journey to recovery wasn't without its challenges. The veterinary team was thrilled with how far he'd come, but they remained vigilant. Patrick's fragile body still bore the scars of his neglect, and some hurdles threatened to slow him down. The first red flag came during a routine checkup. The vet noticed a small amount of fluid building up in Patrick's abdomen. It wasn't a major concern yet, but the team wanted to investigate further. Dr. Goodwin, a cardiologist on staff, performed an echocardiogram to rule out any heart complications. Patrick, as always, handled the procedure with surprising calmness. He lay quietly on the cushion while the technicians gently petted him. Thankfully, the echocardiogram showed no signs of heart issues. Still, the vet team knew Patrick's recovery required constant monitoring. Then came another complication, a foreign object in Patrick's stomach. Likely something he'd eaten out of desperation while he was starving. The object had to be removed. Surgery was the only option, and while the team had no doubts about Patrick's resilience, his weakened state made the procedure risky. The day of the surgery was tense. The team prepared Patrick carefully, ensuring he was stable before they began. Dr. Tom, a skilled surgeon, led the operation, removing the foreign object, a mass of hair and debris, from Patrick's stomach. The procedure went smoothly, but the team held their breath as Patrick was moved to recovery. Hours later, Patrick opened his eyes. He was groggy and weak, but he was alive. Once again, he had defied the odds. As Patrick continued to heal from surgery, his progress became even more remarkable. The fluid in his abdomen disappeared, his appetite improved, and his energy increased. He began going on longer walks, his steps more confident with each outing. The once wobbly legs that struggled to hold him upright were now strong and muscular. One day, Patrick reached a milestone that made everyone smile. He started playing again. He chased after a ball in the clinic's yard, his tail wagging furiously. It was a simple moment, but it symbolized how far he'd come. Despite the setbacks, Patrick's spirit never wavered. He faced every challenge with quiet determination, trusting the people around him to guide him through. His story wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about resilience, strength, and the power of second chances. As Patrick grew healthier, the team began to see the dog he was always meant to be. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving in ways no one thought possible. His coat gleamed, his muscles grew stronger, and his tail seemed to wag more often than not. Patrick's medical challenges could have been the end of his story, but instead, they became another chapter in his incredible journey. Patrick's recovery had turned into something extraordinary. Day by day, the dog who had once been tossed away like trash was transforming into a symbol of hope and resilience. The progress he made was no longer just small victories, it was a complete rebirth. One of the most heartwarming moments came when Patrick finally hit a healthy weight. When he was rescued, he weighed only 20 pounds, a dangerously skeletal figure for a dog his size. But now, after weeks of careful feeding and expert care, Patrick tipped the scale at 48 pounds. His once sunken frame was now filled out with strong, lean muscles. His chest, legs, and back all showed signs of a dog who was thriving, not just surviving. Patrick's coat had become a point of pride for the clinic staff. Where there were once bald patches and dull fur, a sleek and shiny coat now glistened under the sunlight. It was hard to believe this was the same dog who had arrived at the clinic cold, broken, and lifeless. But Patrick's recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. His personality began to shine through in ways that melted everyone's hearts. He had become playful, curious, and full of life. He loved toys, especially a bright red tug toy the staff had given him. He'd grip it tightly in his teeth, wagging his tail as if he were daring someone to try and take it from him. It was clear Patrick was discovering joy for the first time in his life. Patrick's walks turned into runs. The grass beneath his paws became his favorite place to explore, and the sunlight on his back seemed to energize him. Each day he ventured a little farther, his steps confident and steady. What was once a frail, wobbly dog now looked like a happy, healthy companion. One particularly touching moment came during mealtime. Patrick, who had once been too weak to eat, now eagerly awaited his meals. He would bark with excitement when the staff brought out his bowl, his tail wagging so fast it was a blur. He licked his plate clean every time, looking up at the staff as if to thank them for the food that gave him strength. Patrick's newfound love for life was infectious. He had a way of bringing joy to everyone around him, from the veterinary staff to the visitors who came to see him. His playful antics and loving demeanor made it hard to believe he had once been so close to death. The staff marveled at his transformation. One of them remarked, "It's hard to believe this is the same dog who arrived in that bag. Look at him now." It was true. Patrick was unrecognizable, not just in appearance, but in spirit. What stood out most was Patrick's trust in people. After everything he had been through, he could have been fearful or guarded. But Patrick chose love instead. He leaned into every hand that reached out to pet him, wagged his tail for every kind word, and even gave kisses to those who had cared for him. His resilience wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Patrick's story had become more than just a tale of survival. It was a reminder of the incredible strength animals can show, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty. He had gone from being discarded and forgotten to becoming a symbol of hope and love. Every day, Patrick grew stronger, happier, and more vibrant. He wasn't just healing, he was thriving. And as he continued his journey, one thing was certain: Patrick's best days were still ahead of him. Patrick's journey reached its happiest chapter when he finally found what every dog deserves: a loving, forever home. The adoption process wasn't rushed. The veterinary team wanted to ensure that Patrick would be placed with a family who could give him the care and affection he needed. Patrick's story had touched the hearts of countless people, and adoption applications poured in. But one family stood out: a kind-hearted couple who instantly connected with Patrick. When they came to meet him, Patrick's reaction was undeniable. His tail wagged furiously, and he greeted them with his signature kisses. It was as if he knew that this was his family, that after all the darkness he had endured, he was finally going home. The day Patrick left the clinic was bittersweet. The staff had grown deeply attached to him. They had been there for every small victory, every step forward, and every moment of joy. But as they watched Patrick walk out the door, healthy, happy, and full of life, they couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Patrick was leaving them, but he was taking a piece of their hearts with him. In his new home, Patrick thrived like never before. He had a warm bed to sleep in, plenty of toys to play with, and most importantly, a family who adored him. His once dull eyes now sparkled with joy. His tail, which had once been still and lifeless, wagged constantly as he explored his new world. Patrick's days were now filled with love, laughter, and the simple pleasures of being a dog. He played fetch in the yard, lounged in the sun, and cuddled with his family every night. The scars of his past were still there, but they no longer defined him. Patrick was no longer the discarded dog who had been thrown away like trash. He was a survivor, a fighter, and now, a beloved member of a family. For Patrick, the darkness was gone, replaced by the warmth of a home filled with love. Patrick's story is more than just a tale of survival. It's a powerful reminder of resilience, love, and second chances. When Patrick was found, he was at the edge of death. He had been discarded like trash, starved, and abandoned in the cruelest way imaginable. Yet even in his weakest moments, Patrick fought to survive. He refused to let his story end in darkness. His transformation is nothing short of miraculous. From a lifeless, skeletal dog in a garbage bag to a thriving, joyful companion, Patrick's journey shows the incredible power of compassion. It wasn't just his will to live that saved him, it was the kindness of strangers. The maintenance worker who noticed the moving bag, the animal control officer who rushed him to safety, the veterinary staff who never gave up on him, and the family who welcomed him home, all of them played a part in giving Patrick a second chance. Patrick's story also shines a light on the need for action against animal cruelty. Every year, countless animals suffer in silence, their lives disregarded by those who see them as disposable. But Patrick proves that no life is beyond saving. He's living proof that with love, care, and determination, even the most broken lives can be healed. His story is a call to action, a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference. Whether it's reporting animal abuse, volunteering at a shelter, or choosing to adopt instead of shop, every small act of kindness can create ripples that change lives. Today, Patrick is more than just a survivor. He's a symbol of hope, a beacon for others who may be struggling in silence. His story reminds us that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a chance for light to shine through. Patrick's journey is a testament to the resilience of animals and the compassion of humans. He was given a second chance, and he thrived. What other lives can be saved if we simply choose to care?